Mary Sheehan dies without a will, leaving a mysterious legacy and accusations of corruption and theft.
All these people come from out of the woodwork and they've never even seen the person, and they're only there for money.
Mary Sheehan's estate, rumored to be worth more than $200 million, sparks a transatlantic battle over a case of mistaken identity.
When you start digging up bodies to prove connections, I think that's going a little bit on the extreme.
The hunt for Mary Sheehan's heirs reveals a story of intrigue, conspiracy, and death threats in the heart of old Savannah. November 1983. Mary Sheehan, a reclusive spinster, dies alone in her Savannah home at the age of 81. Three days after her death, Mary's body is finally discovered. Kim Burge, chief clerk of the Chatham County Probate Court, works directly across the street from Mary's home.
We were looking out of the window from the courthouse, and the EMS came up, and then I saw them leave with a person in a body bag. So I know that that's the way she left.
Nobody comes forward to claim the body. Everyone in Mary's family has passed away, so court officials will have to handle Mary's estate.
What normally would happen is the court would intervene and appoint an administrator to find out if there is family members and appoint someone to start managing the estate so that waste doesn't take place.
The court appoints John Brennan, an attorney at the law firm that has represented the Sheehan family for a century. Boohan, Williams, and Levy. He and Kim Burge enter Mary's house in search of a will. It was a shock.
What she had done was taken newspaper and stacked it from the floor to the ceiling where you could not see in at all. And above that, it had a hanging, just one bulb light. And on the bottom of the string, there was bread pinned by a clothespin. And I remember asking Mr. Brennan, why is that? And he said he could only assume that was to keep the rats out of the bread. I remember that there was also a bathroom downstairs, but the bathroom had no commode. It had a hole for one and a sink. But that was it. You know, it was not very clean. I couldn't imagine living that way.
Kim would often see Mary Sheehan in the backyard of her house.
Many times if I'd go to lunch, she might be in the back. But if she saw you, she brisked right past and back in the house. She didn't talk. But I think she lived a very reclusive life. Sad.
Since no will is found, the administrator takes care of funeral arrangements. Mary is buried at the family plot next to her three siblings, her mother Ellen and her father William, both born in Ireland. Mary has lived all her life in her parents' house. With no will to be found, and given the poor condition of the property, the estate doesn't appear to have much value. But appearances are deceptive.
We called around to the different banks, and we did discover that there was a safety deposit box at the old C&S Bank. And so we went to the safety deposit box, opened the box together, and take an inventory of the box, where we found no will. But we did find $47,000 in cash. And what was so interesting about this cash is it was all $100 bills and $50 bills, 1929 series. They were crisp, brand new, never touched. And then if you went over to that house and saw how she lived, you would have thought she had no money. Now, I don't know, but if I had $47,000, it would be different than living in that nasty mess that was over there.
With such a large amount of cash up for grabs, the administrators of Mary's estate begin to search for heirs. Attorney Melanie Marks joins the legal team.
To determine if there were any heirs in the Savannah area, you would look at birth and death records, marriage certificates, and see if anybody could produce evidence that they were related to Mary Sheehan. There were some articles published in the Savannah Morning News asking people to come forward if they knew of any relatives of Mary Sheehan. She was a fairly reclusive individual, so people didn't know too much about her family.
If no heirs are found, the money will go directly to the state of Georgia.
Typically the administrator is going to exhaust all leads to find an heir. I've been practicing for over 25 years, and we've never had an estate where we couldn't find an heir.
But Mary's belongings don't offer up many clues.
She kept scrapbooks of religious sites that she had visited. Very little personal information was found in her belongings.
Since Mary's parents were from Ireland, John Brennan turns to an Irish-born priest living in Savannah for help. Father Jeremiah McCarthy.
He simply asked if I would consider looking for possible relatives, given the name of Sheehan and the fact that there was some possible linkage with County Cork, where I was born. I agreed that I would do this. I was not on a payroll or anything for this. It was merely something to do in my spare time. I am not a genealogist, I will admit that. But at the time, it had a certain fascination for me because I thought, well, one of the reasons I came to this country was to minister to the Irish.
Since Mary's mother, Ellen O'Regan, comes from County Cork, the administrators of Mary's estate arrange for an ad to be placed in the Irish newspapers. For the successful and wealthy County Cork businessman, Dermot O'Regan, the name Ellen O'Regan immediately grabs his attention.
My wife was in Dungarvan, and she saw the paper.
My wife was in Dungarvan, and she saw the paper that said Ellen Reagan. They were looking for an Ellen Reagan from County Cork, and she brought the paper home, and she said to me, "That might be the Ellen Reagan you're looking for."
Dermot O'Regan had always been fascinated with his family's connection to the United States. Dermot's grandfather, Jeremiah, and his sister Ellen had traveled to Boston in 1898. While Jeremiah eventually returned to Ireland, Ellen stayed behind. It is believed that Mary Sheehan's mother, Ellen, had come to Savannah from Boston, a journey she made on her own. Dermot is convinced that Ellen, his grandfather's long-lost sister, has finally been found. Gordon Smith, a Savannah lawyer and local historian, is asked by the administrator to investigate the circumstances of Ellen's arrival in America.
I suggested that we look in the newspapers. There was an article, and it actually told about Ellen and the fact that she was from Cork. Basically, when she got married in 1898, we were in the throes of the Spanish-American War. There was a lot of activity here and a lot of excitement. And when she was married, seems to me, and this is sheer speculation, it appears to have been an arranged marriage.
Ellen was alone, in a foreign city, marrying a man she may have never met.
I suspect it was very intimidating. Savannah is not Ireland. Summer was already moving in. Certainly within a few months it was extremely hot here and humid. Our terrain here is swampy, almost Gothic, with Spanish moss and live oak trees and a lot of insects.
If Ellen O'Regan Sheehan of Savannah turns out to be the long-lost sister, the O'Regans will be Mary's next of kin and could inherit her entire estate. Dermot enlists his son Louis to help out.
It was the first time we've ever seen or heard of any claim being advertised.
It was the first time we've ever heard of this claim being advertised in the Irish papers, so there was obviously some substance to it. So we decided we'd do as much research as we could and try and get to the bottom of it.
Since Mary's estate wasn't estimated to have much value, the O'Regans weren't drawn to the case by money. What fascinated them most was confirming their family ties. But the O'Regans are not the only family to spot the advertisement placed in the Irish newspapers.
As we say in Ireland, where there is a will, there are relatives. And that brought in a host of hoaxes, and I guess the lawyers had to sift out the real from the fake on that.
The administrator of Mary's estate, John Brennan, receives claim after claim from Ireland.
I can remember he'd be in the record room in our court. He'd say, "Oh, by the way, I got 2 more calls today." And I said, "Well, by the time it's over, we'll have 100. And we'd just laugh. And me, having been in the court system for 27 years, I've seen a lot of different things, so it really doesn't shock me. It's just very sad that it happens. All these people come from out of the woodwork and they've never even seen the person, and they're only there for money.
The O'Regans are firmly convinced that they are the rightful heirs to Mary Sheehan's estate. And to prove it, they'll spare no expense.
It was the old story, we have some rich relative in America who has died, and we're going to expand it to the max. These people in Savannah are not too smart, they might just give it to us.
But once in the U.S., the O'Regans discover that nothing is easy as they stumble onto a potential conspiracy that hits at the heart of Savannah society. Administrators in Savannah, Georgia have discovered that although she lived in squalor, Mary Sheehan had squirreled away nearly $50,000 in a safety deposit box. And it's not long before they find more, a lot more, a substantial portfolio of Savannah real estate.
The first of the assets that I had any knowledge of was just the fact that there was property. The piece of property she was sitting on, living in at the time, was in a prime real estate area, and real estate was good at that particular time. And I had also been told that there were several other pieces of property that were in her dad's name. And knowing the law, I knew that it would trickle down and eventually become hers.
The real estate was amassed by Mary's father, William Sheehan, a Savannah police officer who may owe his success to some well-connected friends, like Johnny Bowen, a legendary lawyer and perhaps the most powerful political boss in Savannah's history. Estate administrators John Brennan and Melanie Marks work for the law firm that still bears his name.
Johnny was connected and very close to all things Irish here and to all the Irish people. He was the lawyer for the family, and I feel sure that there was possibly some reciprocity there. There was a lot of petty corruption here. The Irish are very astute with their money. I suspect that as a police officer, though, either he was extremely lucky in his purchases and even luckier in being able to hold on to them. You know, buying land is one thing. Trying to keep it is something entirely different. And he was able to do that somehow.
Perhaps Boone's suspected connections to the Dixie Mafia allowed William to hold on to his valuable property for so long. At the time of his death in 1928, William Sheehan owned about 30 properties in downtown Savannah. This real estate was passed down to the 4 Sheehan children, but none of the children married, and none of them had children of their own. Mary Sheehan was the end of the line, unless someone can prove otherwise. The Irish newspapers quickly jump on the story and begin to speculate that the Sheehan estate may be worth millions. And just as Father McCarthy prepares to leave for Ireland to sort out the dozens of claimants, an important clue is discovered in Savannah. Amid the meager scraps of Mary's personal possessions, the administrators find compelling evidence that links Mary back to family in Ireland.
There is no doubt that the key piece of evidence was the Uncle William letter. This was a letter written in April of 1941 from a Uncle William O'Regan in Gubeen Scald. It was written to Mary expressing condolences on the death of her mother, and it referred to their visit about 10 years or so before when they had come to see her, and it said that Ellen was being prayed for in her local church, and it was just a letter of condolences.
Melanie Marks believes that the letter must have held very special significance for Mary.
All of us have lost relatives and received letters of condolence. It's very rare to keep a letter that long unless it means something to you. And it was found in her scrapbook with information on all the religious sites she'd visited throughout her life. The Uncle William letter was probably the one piece of tangible evidence that tied her to a named individual that we could track down.
The Uncle William letter points the way for Father McCarthy's investigation in County Cork, Ireland.
I found a baptismal record for Mary's parents. That would be William and Ellen. Those records also indicate who the parents would be. So that gave me some inkling of that, yes, we're in the right area here. I remember going to that local village in Skull. I remember going into a local pub, and I was told that there was a man in there who knew everybody in the area. And I told him my story, and yes, he said, yeah, there was a family in Gubeen by the name of O'Regans, and gave me some of the facts and so forth. I tried to visit as many of those who were named, and listening to their story, and consistently they all pointed in the same direction.
And that direction was a family called the Halls. They can prove that they are cousins of the letter writer William, and therefore stand to inherit Mary's estate. To the Halls, this unexpected turn of events was like winning the lottery.
That letter certainly was relevant because it made a direct connection between Gubeen and the family in Savannah.
Of the hundreds of claims received, administrators believe the Halls and the O'Regans are the two strongest. Both families are related to an Ellen O'Regan, but which Ellen ended up moving to Savannah? In Cork, Dermot and Louis O'Regan employ a genealogist and former police detective named Jim Herlihy to prove their case.
My rule of thumb the whole way was the definition of evidence, which...
My rule of thumb the whole way was the definition of evidence, which we use in our own police force. If it happened, it happened. And if it's a fact, it's a fact. And there's no changing of the facts. It's a search for the truth the whole way.
The research effort is enormous. 4 years are spent collecting all the birth, death, and marriage certificates from earlier generations. Jim Herlihy is able to trace every step of Ellen O'Regan's journey across the Atlantic. He also finds her marriage and death certificates. He's convinced he can prove that she is the relative they're looking for.
Over time, it all started to piece together.
Over time, it all started to piece together, but it took a lot of time, a lot of researching, and a lot of money.
Their case is strong, but not fully convincing. A few of the dates just don't match. And Herlihy could not come up with an explanation for the infamous Uncle William letter. Herlihy decides to go to Skull to see if he can trace anyone who knew the letter's author. He stumbles onto a man who claims to have been his friend.
I met a gentleman who was 93 years of age at the time I interviewed him.
I met a gentleman who was 93 years old when I interviewed him. He told me he was his best friend, and he said if he had a sister in Savannah, I would have known about it.
Herlihy concludes that the term uncle was used informally as a term of endearment. Mary does not have an uncle named William in Skull, only a distant relative.
He was a cousin. He was a distant cousin.
He was a distant cousin, because in the letter at no stage does he say my sister. He says your mother.
Armed with thorough research, ample resources, and endless determination, the O'Regans travel to Savannah to put up a fight, whatever the cost. To their dismay, they're met with anything but Southern hospitality. The O'Regan family of County Cork are one of many different claimants to Mary Sheehan's purportedly valuable estate.
I did not believe that so many people would come forward claiming to be an heir. A lot of it was the inflated value in the Irish papers, so people thought there were millions involved instead of thousands. All I can speculate is that they did not feel that they had to check their sources. If they had contacted the administrator, they would have been told the estate was worth approximately $95,000, and it was just blown out of proportion.
In County Cork, Dermot O'Regan is shocked to hear that the estate is worth less than $100,000. He is even more surprised when he receives an offer from the administrators who have full control over the estate to split the proceeds with the Hall family 50-50.
The court generally encourages claimants to come to some resolution, short of a trial. That way, nobody's completely happy, but nobody's completely upset about the outcome.
They said it was $90,000.
They said the estate was worth $90,000 and they offered me half. But I said I wasn't looking for that. I was looking for Ellen Regan. I thought there was something wrong here. The system was all wrong.
With the offer refused, the administrators rule solidly in favor of the Hall's claim on the basis of the Uncle William letter.
We believe these people were probably distantly related. We just thought they weren't as related as closely as the William O'Regan and Gabine skull.
The 50-50 offer simply strengthens the O'Regans' resolve.
That was completely off the wall.
It was completely off the wall. 1 minute they were saying we were not the heirs, but they still offered us 50-50. But if we took it, that was the end of it. There was obviously a big cover-up, and we had to try and get to the bottom of it.
Convinced that something is amiss, the O'Regans head to Savannah, ready to take their claim to the courtroom. Jim Herlihy, the O'Regans' genealogist, briefs a local lawyer. They have just 3 days to prepare for the case.
We arrived with all certified copies and all sorts of records and this type of thing.
We arrived with all certified copies and all sorts of records. I tried to explain the case in the best way I could, and he was very clinical in his approach. We'd have to break it down in very simple terms and then produce certificate by certificate and show the family tree and literally kill people off the family tree with certificates. We were told we were going to court Monday, and I had hardly got any sleep.
I was surprised by Dermot O'Regan spending the amount of money that he was spending to contest an estate of this size. I have no idea what he spent in attorney's fees and genealogy and having people flown to Savannah, but he had to spend more than the estate was worth.
The court hearings begin. Father McCarthy is called to give evidence. Based on the Uncle William letter and his investigations, he says the Hall family are the rightful heirs.
Oh, I'm absolutely convinced. I would not have submitted the names if I did not believe it. From the church records, from personal interviews with many of those people, and from the letters and correspondence, I had no doubt that this was a valid connection. This was the only connection that I could see.
But nothing, it was just a letter.
There was nothing. There was just a letter. There were no death certificates, no marriage certificates, no shipping records, nothing. Just a letter. That's no proof.
The annoying part is for someone just to hold up a letter and say, we're there, this is it.
The annoying part of that is for someone just to hold up a letter and say that this is it without any proof. Nobody proved on the other side that their Ellen Regan even went to America. The case is built wrong, the letter is wrong, and that's the end of that.
That's the end of that.
Dermot takes the stand. He tries to persuade the court that his great-aunt Ellen is in fact Mary Sheehan's mother. He presents the evidence his team has pulled together, but it is received with skepticism. He doesn't convince either the administrator or Father McCarthy.
There didn't seem to be any connection that I was aware of. But if he could prove it to the court, I would certainly be the first to accept it. I was merely looking for the truth.
Dermot believes the court had already made up their minds before the evidence was even properly heard.
We were up against it from the start.
We were up against it from the start. We were up against it all the time. I didn't realize till afterwards that they had already awarded the estate to the other Ellen Regan. It was all actually decided before we even went to court.
The judge took testimony, took it under consideration, took several months to rule. I don't know why they would think that other than they didn't like the outcome.
Just as the hearing closes, the O'Regans are presented with one of the documents they had requested. A document they believe will help their case. Ellen Sheehan's U.S. passport application.
I got an envelope.
We opened the envelope and there was the passport application. But on it, all the numbers were blanked out.
But why is the date of birth blanked out? The O'Regans suspect foul play. Jim Herlihy goes to the passport office archives and retrieves the original application. The numbers are intact. and the birth date on Ellen's application is 1879. Something was definitely not right. Louis and Dermot know that their Ellen O'Regan was born in 1882, a 3-year difference. But the Hall's Ellen O'Regan is much older. She was born in 1864, a 15-year difference. In 1932, when she applied for a passport, the Hall's Ellen would have been 68, while the O'Regan's Ellen only 53.
She could not have been the Ellen Regan born in 1864 and then claimed to have been born in 1879. A 68-year-old woman does not look like a 53-year-old. Surely the person in front of her would know that couldn't be her age.
Melanie Marks doesn't believe the conflicting dates prove a thing.
Mary's mother, Ellen, had several documents that had inconsistent birth dates. Very few of them had the same date. Her passport, her marriage certificate, her death certificate had various dates. I don't think the woman knew when she was born.
If the Hall's claim is correct, Ellen would not have been 18, but 35 years old when she married, and 42 years old when she gave birth to Mary. For Jim Herlihy, that does not add up.
There's no guaranteed, no record.
There's no records I've yet to find. If I'd found that Ellen was born in 1864, then I'd be the first to say it. I'd have handed it over to the Halls and said, that's ended.
But it's too late to use the passport evidence in court. The judge rules in favor of the Hall family, and Mary Sheehan's estate, worth a total of just $80,000, is distributed among 10 family members.
Each of them got approximately $7,800 in cash from the estate and some limited personal property. Most everything had been sold off. There were some photos and a Bible and some other type items that were distributed.
I learned a long time ago, once the judge has ruled, that's the ruling. It's cut in stone after that. And so I'm not going to second guess the court system. However, as a qualitative measure, I certainly favored the O'Regan's claim. I felt like they had a good claim. It's natural for people to say you're an outsider and we will decide in favor of the local people rather than someone from outside. I suspect, and don't know this, but the O'Regans were probably ignored somewhat simply because they were from Cork. A judge may make a ruling and his attitude might be, well, what are you going to do if you don't like it? Appeal it.
Which is exactly what the O'Regans plan to do. As they scratch beneath the surface of the Sheehan estate, a mysterious stranger sheds light on what appears to be conspiracy and corruption in Old Savannah. Mary Sheehan's Savannah estate has been closed and distributed to 10 members of the Hall family. But Irish businessmen Dermot and Louis O'Regan are convinced that they are the rightful heirs. They ask Irish probate lawyer Margaret Campbell for help.
It's definitely an unusual case for me. But it was a very interesting case because it was what I loved, working out people's relationships to other people. That's what I love doing. I felt that maybe there was a case to answer, that there was an incorrect chain established. So what I was trying to do was to establish a reasonable cause for the judge in Savannah to say that maybe this case needs to be relooked into.
Armed with their new legal talent, the O'Regans returned to Savannah.
It wasn't the money, it wasn't money.
It wasn't the money. My father just wanted to prove his point and prove his family link. It wasn't money motivated.
It wasn't money motivated.
Well, I'm sure they were interested in the money because the figures that were being thrown at them were huge. But I think as time went on, he just wanted to be right.
The O'Regans have strong suspicions that the Sheehan estate is much more valuable than they have been told. They dig deep into Savannah real estate records.
So we had to kind of go back through maybe 40 years of all the transactions of properties. It was prior to computer or access to computer files, and we had to trawl through different sections. Every year had all the transactions that had gone on and all the registrations of properties.
Portfolios, property numbers.
We checked out portfolios, property numbers, estates, anything, and we found a lot of stuff.
We found a lot of stuff.
Finally, a local lawyer offers some inside information.
This lady came up
with a telephone number, and she said that we might want to ring this gentleman. So I rang the number. The person said that he'd meet us outside the courthouse.
We went outside the courthouse.
So we went outside, and this gentleman was standing at the door, and he said, "Keep walking." He didn't want to be seen speaking to us.
So we walked
down a few side streets. We went into this restaurant.
He disclosed a lot of information.
The gentleman disclosed a lot of information as to what was going on, and the connections to a club, and who was who and what was what in Savannah. And the suspicions grew from there.
The informant tells the O'Regans that the so-called Savannah Club might have been milking money out of Mary Sheehan's estate for years.
A lot of the houses were very old and bad, but the ground was worth money.
A lot of the houses were very old and bad, but the ground was worth money. There were good bricked houses worth a lot of money, and they're still standing there today. We came across some stuff. There was this company that had a lot of property that belonged to the Sheehans, and there was a lot of other Sheehan property belonging to other people as well. We found a lot of corruption going on there.
There was no end to
the amount of property we were finding. We had figures of like 50 million and 100 million. But I don't know, we just could never get to the bottom of all the figures.
It appeared that all of Mary's properties were being sold back to the club at a huge discount, and with the blessing of the courts.
All the stuff was being sold back to
All the stuff was being sold back to the so-called club. There were different consortiums set up for redevelopment in Savannah, and these companies were buying up all the properties. Some of them were sold for $10, issued through the probate court, and signed off by the system that was there to get rid of it. No proper evaluation from what we could see. There was something like 30 properties in total. That's what we found. I don't know what else there was, or whatever monies were there, or whatever. We don't know. Probably we'll never know.
Dermot believes that Mary Sheehan was the victim of fraud and was not aware of the true nature of her wealth.
She was left alone, Jens.
She was left alone, and I don't know if she really knew what was happening. There were a lot of property, a lot of houses, rents coming in. I'd say it was legal people who were handling the affairs. She didn't have a clue. She didn't know.
She knew what she was worth.
She didn't know what she was worth.
She didn't know.
But Melanie Marks from Bowen, Williams and Levy says the O'Regan suspicions are completely misplaced.
Mr. Brennan was an upstanding attorney, and he was going to do what was in the best interest of the estate. To question John Brennan's actions in selling the real estate, to me, is just unfounded. I have no reason to think that the sales were not fair.
Despite these assurances, Dermot and Louis still believe the Savannah establishment has turned against them.
Everybody knew what
you were doing. If you went into one office, by the time you got to the next office, they knew you were on the way. If you went to the law society or to the court, everybody knew you were there.
On the next trip to Savannah, suspicion turns to fear after a potentially lethal incident on a freeway.
This van was running up beside us.
This van was running up beside us, and then, all of a sudden, swerved and cut us off. It hit us sideways and put us down on the embankment.
On the freeway.
Whether this was related or not, I don't know, but I don't see any reason why someone should just all of a sudden try and run you off the road in Savannah. Looking at the characters down there and the type of society that you were in, I wouldn't put anything past it. Anything.
Louis and Dermot are shaken, but the incident only makes them more determined to prove their case. They return home to plan their next move.
Dermot had no way of getting into the Savannah court because the case was closed. So we thought about it for a while, and I felt then that, well, if I could establish that in Ireland Dermot would have had some standing in relation to this estate, that maybe then we could go to Savannah with this document and that this would maybe cause a bit of interest.
Margaret asks the High Court in Ireland to recognize Dermot's connection to the Sheehan estate.
I thought that the existence of the Irish grant could well make the judge in Savannah have another look at the case to see whether there was a mistake made.
It takes months, but finally the Irish court rules in their favor.
We were convinced, once she got the High Court order...
We were convinced, once she got the High Court order in Dublin, that there was going to be a bit of pressure back on America to do something.
Oh, they thought they were home and dry then, you see. But again, I had to say, no, lads, this is, it's the first step in what we're going to try and do.
With the Irish court order in hand, Margaret has a plan that could reopen the case and settle this once and for all. A plan that involves digging up the dead.
So the next step then was to try and get the body exhumed in Savannah.
Determined to support their claim to the Sheehan estate, the O'Regans are ready to dig up two bodies, Mary's mother Ellen in Savannah and her brother Jeremiah, Dermot's grandfather, in Ireland. A DNA test would prove once and for all the genetic link between them.
I felt that it was the only way to try and sort it out.
I felt that was the only way to try and sort it out, between my grandfather and his sister. And I felt it would bring us to a dead end. Whether that was right or wrong.
It was a very
brave decision, and some people would think it's a morbid decision. A lot of people probably would. But that shows his determination in believing what his grandfather told him.
When you start digging up bodies to prove connections, I think that's going a little bit on the extreme. After all, we write on the gravestones, R.I.P., rest in peace. And it's not rest in peace until we find your will.
I started it, and I'd like to finish it. Whether I'm right or wrong, I'd like to bring out the truth.
Chuck Powell, the coroner's assistant, was closely involved with a difficult decision.
It's the first request I ever handled with the coroner's office like that. After having an independent genealogist look at the material and looking at several court records of the trial, Dr. Metz made the decision that there was probable cause to allow this exhumation to go forward, that this person could possibly be related to Dermot O'Regan.
The coroner, Dr. Metz, says it is well-researched and credible. The decision is made.
Margaret gave us a ring.
Margaret gave us a ring to tell us Dr. Metz had given permission to dig up the body. And we knew we were in a different field altogether now.
Both exhumations in Savannah and Ireland will be carried out by Dr. Karen Burns, a forensic anthropologist who specializes in the identification of human remains.
I've worked in disasters, World Trade Center, after Katrina, hurricanes, that sort of thing. I have been involved in many identification cases, but not where inheritance was involved.
Dr. Burns begins to exhume the 60-year-old gravesite of Ellen O'Regan, Mary's mother.
Well, Ellen O'Regan Sheehan's grave was a very simple excavation. It was an ideal disinterment. The body was buried in an individual grave. There was no one else in the grave. Everything was intact.
Dr. Burns works slowly and methodically, careful to avoid contamination.
The femur is the thigh bone. It's a very dense bone, and it's possible to obtain a reasonable amount of DNA, assuming the preservation is good.
At the cemetery in Cork, Ireland, it is time to exhume Jeremiah O'Regan, Dermot's grandfather.
Kind of emotional to a degree, all right, for digging up the...
It was kind of emotional digging up our own people. My great-grandfather would have wanted us to do it to prove our point. So that was it, and we just got on with it.
Identifying Jeremiah O'Regan's remains is not quite as easy. He shares his grave with other family members.
First of all, there were supposed to be 4 people in this particular grave, and that's not so unusual in Europe. So I had expectations of finding 4 coffins. The grave turned out to be far more complicated than expected. Instead of 4 boxes stacked, there was 1 coffin at the top, 1 at the very bottom, and a lot of fill in between. So we still did work at going down layer by layer and removing everything as it came up, but a good deal of sorting had to be done at the same time.
As Dr. Burns sifts through the remains, searching for Jeremiah, others are voicing their unease.
How much does it cost to do all of this? Exhume a body, do DNA tests? Does the cost outweigh what this poor person, this is where it seems to me ridiculous. We're digging her body, thinking we're going to get rich. I think that's a disgrace, and I don't think I would want it on my conscience.
Finally, after several weeks of analysis, the DNA results are ready.
The report from the DNA laboratory was that none of the samples matched the standard of the reference sample. In other words, the 3 adults whose samples were removed from the Cork County grave did not match the sample from Savannah.
Dermot and Louis are stunned. Ellen O'Regan of Savannah is not genetically related to them.
Couldn't believe it.
Couldn't believe it.
I still don't believe it.
I still don't believe it.
My paperwork seems to be right. It's the DNA is wrong. There's something wrong somewhere.
Knowing Dr. Karen Burns for about the last 15 years and watching her and the way she works and how thorough she is, I'm very confident that the sampling was done correctly and that the information was passed on to the DNA lab the way it should be. The sample was passed on, and I can't really speak for the DNA lab, but we've had good results with that DNA lab in the past, so I think it's a very, very good source for running the DNA.
The whole paper trail
contradicts the DNA findings. The paper documentation is there, generations of families and a family tree. Something doesn't stack up.
If there was a mistake, I don't know where the mistake was. I don't know what else to say.
To this day, the O'Reagans still do not accept the results of the DNA tests. Dermot has not given up hope entirely and plans to have the bones tested again. The Mary Sheehan case spanned over 20 years, an investigation that cost the O'Reagans more than $1 million of their own money. Today, they maintain that they didn't do it for the money, but to right a wrong and expose theft and corruption that hits the heart of old Savannah. We may never know the truth, but one thing is certain: Mary Sheehan, who lived so simply, would probably never have imagined the controversy caused by her death.
There's something wrong somewhere.
There's something wrong somewhere.
The truth might come out sometime.
The truth might come out sometime.